Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. Everybody is having a wonderful day. I hope that the sun is shining. I hope that the birds are singing and that the wind is at your back. I have with me today an incredible show with an incredible guest. I think you're all going to enjoy it. So today we have the rare opportunity to dive into the complex, often hidden world of infidelity and healing with one of the most respected voices in the field. Dr. Talal H. Alsaleem, an award-winning marriage counselor and the author of Infidelity, the best worst thing that could happen to your marriage. Dr. Alsaleem has dedicated his career to exploring the deep undercurrents that lead to affairs and their long-lasting impact. What makes his approach revolutionary is not just his expertise in diagnosing the root causes, but his creation of the systematic affair recovery therapy, SART, a groundbreaking method that has helped countless couples navigate the devastating aftermath of betrayal. Dr. Alsaleem doesn't offer false hope. His work is about raw honesty, guiding couples through difficult truths so they can heal in ways that are meaningful and authentic, whether the path leads to reconciliation or a fresh start. His powerful research encapsulated in works like Unfaithful and Unrepentant, Affairs Beyond the Hope of Repair, goes beyond conventional therapy and forces us to confront the deeper, sometimes irreparable wounds that affairs can cause. Whether you're a clinician or someone touched by the trauma of infidelity, recovery, but profound clarity on the choices we make after trust is shattered. Get ready for a conversation that will challenge your assumptions and equip you with the knowledge to see beyond the surface of infidelity into the transformative possibilities it presents. Dr. Talal, thank you for being here today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, what an interesting time we live in. And I before we got started on the show, I was telling you just what an incredible topic this is. Like this particular topic of infidelity touches so many people, from partners in a marriage to partners in a relationship to children. And how did you end up in this position? Is this something that affected you when you were growing up, or what was it that kind of brought you to this world?
Great question. I always, when I do my training, the first thing that I do is I ask the therapist to kind of just show me a show of hands of how many people here have been impacted by infidelity directly or indirectly. I think, unfortunately, infidelity is one of these things that we all have either experienced in our relationship or in the relationship of others, that folks that we care about, family members, parents, siblings, and things along those lines. What brought me to the field in general, and infidelity in particular, is really my passion about this topic and my skill set in working with couples. So, way back in the day when I was a younger clinician, many moons ago, I promised myself to try to get a well rounded clinical experience. I wanted to work with as many populations and as many different levels of cares because I wanted to learn more about myself as a clinician, my strengths, my weaknesses, and which population I was going to be working with. And with each place that you work with and with each population, you get the wonderful opportunity to get a new training method to add to your clinical tool belt. So at the end of that journey, I realized that I'm really passionate about working with couples, which is funny because most couples don't like working with couples because it's challenging. But I love the speed and the passion and the impact that you make, because when you help a couple get unstuck, not only you're helping them, you're helping the future generations as well, and what kind of models that they're going to show their kids. So when I had my private practice working exclusively with couples, I realized that the majority of my couples, at least over 50% of them, are not just coming for a tune-up, they're coming in because of a crisis. And most of the time, this crisis is related to a current affair that was discovered, or an affair that was discovered many years ago and they haven't been able to recover from it. So when I started looking at this clinical toolbox that I accumulated throughout the years to figure out which treatment methods that I can use for my clients, I realized that none of these methods are actually useful for healing infidelity. Most of them are generalized methods that were just made for garden variety relationship issues. So I found myself borrowing intervention from this model and that model and doing this patchwork of intervention, but it still wasn't effective. So as they say, need is the mother of invention. I had this
Right.
vantage point of working with couples primarily for dealing with infidelity. So I started jotting down my observation and began to see where people actually get stuck. And that created the pathway for the systematic affair recovery therapy model that I have created, tailor made for infidelity, specifically for folks who are trying to recover from affairs. And the rest is history. And, as you know, infidelity is really a fascinating field. There's so much unknown, and I really like to kind of discover things that can help people improve their life.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you did, and I'm really curious. I got a bunch of questions lined up, and the first one that kind of comes to mind is, as you've been in this field for so long, is there different trends in different socioeconomic backgrounds and different groups and different age groups, or is there some sort of Ariadne thread that runs through all of them, or what are some trends that you've seen? Does it affect different groups differently, or is it kind of something that's the same throughout?
Sure, that's a great question. So before we answer that, we have to take a look at etiology and our misconceptions about what causes infidelity. If you ask the average person what causes infidelity, most people think that infidelity happened because of a relationship deficit, or that people
Mhm.
are not happy with their partner. Now, granted, one of the leading causes of infidelity is relationship dissatisfaction, but that's not the only etiological reason that causes infidelity. We all have seen the couples where we, look at their story and we don't get it, scratch our head. We say, okay, they seem to have the perfect partner, their partner is
Yep.
meeting all their needs, they're compatible, yet the person is unfaithful. Sometimes infidelity has nothing to do with a relationship. It has to do with an individual issue that the unfaithful partner is dealing with, such as mental health issues that has not been treated or diagnosed.
Mm.
Classic example of that would be folks with personality disorder, somebody who's narcissistic, somebody with antisocial personality disorder, people who struggle with addictions of any kind. But a third etiological reason that causes infidelity is exactly what you talked about, the environmental factors. So, believe it or not, things associated to our socioeconomic status, place of residence, the type of job we have could actually increase or decrease our chances of engaging in infidelity. When I started delving into infidelity and the causes of it, I wanted to take a multidisciplinary approach. I didn't want to look at it just from the psychological lens. I tried to look
Yep.
at it from cross-cultural anthropological lens, as well as from evolutionary biology lens, as well as from a sociological perspective. And when you look at the causes of infidelity from a sociological perspective, we have to emphasize the roles of socioeconomics. So we'll use, for
Yeah.
example, things like power dynamics.
Yeah.
In all relationships, as much as we like to think that they are egalitarian and both partners have equal rights and responsibility, that is not always the case. Sometimes you have relationship with power disparity, where you have one person who have more power than their other partner. Why is this the case? Sometimes it's belief system. Let's say you live in a culture where simply being a male gives you automatically more power. So when you have a power disparity in the relationship, um, it creates what they call a top dog and underdog dynamic. The top dog is the person with more power. That person is going to give themselves more rights in the relationship simply because they can. They're also going to be somebody who is less likely to be vulnerable because that's going to be challenging their power position in the relationship. The person who is the underdog is going to be somebody who is often feeling that they're not good enough, that doesn't their contribution does not matter. And if you look at it from that angle, both of them can have good motivation to engage in affairs because of the disparity in the power dynamic. If we take a look at place of residence, research shows that people who live in smaller cities and smaller communities have less prevalence rates of infidelity. Why is this the case? Well, when you live in a small city, there is less access for opportunities that will cause you to be anonymous, right? Smaller
Yep.
communities, everybody knows everyone. So if you're going to be unfaithful, your chances of being discovered is going to be higher. If you compare it to bigger cities, you have a higher level of anonymity. So there is so many environmental factor that causes infidelity that we often don't think about and we often ignore when it comes to treatment. And that's why oftentimes using generalized methods doesn't really prevent relapse.
Yeah, it's a very complex question to think about all the factors that could lead to it, and I would imagine that it's a case by case event. Sometimes when I look at Twitter or X, or if you just look at the bombardment of media that hits kids and adults every day. We know that advertisers use sex and fear to sell. It's like we're bombarded by housewives and Andrew Tate and all the Saudi sheiks with their harems, and like, how big of a role is culture playing to be infidelity on some level? It seems like it's calling us.
Major role. So my third book that I'm working on is called Deconstructing Infidelity: The Causes and the Myth. And in that book, I dedicate a full part about the environmental factors and what happens in pop culture and around us, and to what extent that influence what we do in our relationships. But unfortunately, so think of it this way: cultural norms and the type of
Okay.
cultural norms that we get exposed to does shape our view about relationship and the value of fidelity. So if you're exposed to cultural norms that sees infidelity as something that's a positive thing or something that's not frowned upon, or again, we'll use the example of toxic masculinity. If you're in a culture where being unfaithful seen as a cool thing because you're the guy who sleep with all these women, most likely you're going to engage in those behaviors because your cultural norms does not discourage you from doing that. And
Mm.
sometimes those cultural norms are in the micro level, of your family of origin. So when I work with my clients, before we even talk about the infidelity, I gather a lot of information about their family of origin, their past relationship, because sometimes the seeds of infidelity were planted a long time ago. If you look at the macro level of culture, unfortunately, right now, any place you look, right, even an advertisement for a cheeseburger, right, is going to be
Yep.
selling you, things are not related to food, things related to sex and sexuality. But it's also common when you see it in almost every TV show that you watch. There's always going to be something about infidelity,
Yep.
and oftentimes people associate infidelity with power and influence because in a sense, there is some of that aspect to it, right? If somebody is
Yeah.
cavalier about those behaviors, they must think that they can do it, get away with it, and are okay with the consequences of that behavior. So yeah, cultural norm significantly impact that. Another aspect of this is the development of technology, right? We
Mm.
used to live in a day and age where it maybe was a little bit more challenging for people to engage in fidelity, right? Nowadays, it's at your fingertips. There are many apps that are designed specifically for people to hide their behavior, or websites that are designed for people who want to engage in affairs, not just any kind of relationship. All of these factors increases folks' ability to uh, not fight their impulses as much.
Yeah, it's really well said. It, I've read in a few articles that have brought up this idea of monogamy. And sometimes, you can find some really well written articles that say things like, is monogamy something made up by humans? Like, is monogamy something that we should be doing? What's your take on that idea? Like, is this something that's natural? Is it unnatural? Or what do you think?
As long as you gave me a good opportunity to stand on my soapbox. So here's what I feel about it. I
Okay.
think it's great that we are thinking about relationship in different ways, that there is no one model that we can say is the most successful models, because that would be ridiculous. What I have a problem with is the things to swing in the opposite direction, where we're saying that monogamy is not attainable and it's impossible to achieve. I believe monogamy is not for everyone. Some people can do it and happy and satisfied with it, and for some people, that's not the right fit for them. So I don't think I'm not in the camp where I think that we're not wired for monogamy, and I can debunk the evolutionary biology perspective, right? Because people who use this, they usually go for an evolutionary model, and they use
Right.
the idea of you know uh, the different reproductive strategies. So it goes something like
Yep.
this: females have a limited number of eggs, males have a limited number of sperms, therefore dictate what kind of mating strategies that they have. Because of that, the males would opt for more interactions, more frequency, and females would tend to lean toward quality of interaction because of the long gestation period, and also wanting to be more selective about their mates. I think that work, if we're living in a caveman society, maybe you can make that argument. If we're simple primate, we are way advanced beyond that. Men and women are interacting differently. Our idea of what it means to be male and female is changing, so we cannot use such archaic arguments. And I think sometimes people use that as a cop out, right? Wouldn't it be nice if you read a book that says, oh, some therapist says monogamy is not attainable, so it's okay for me to cheat. right? So that's the problem that I have with that, is that sometimes this knowledge is being abused.
Yeah, it reminds me of the R versus K strategy too, like the rat versus the wolf, where you know some particular if people would go on an evolutionary model, some reproductive strategies are to have as many kids as possible, and other strategies are I'm gonna have one or two kids and raise them up to be the best possible. At some point in time, I feel like it comes to education, and I know when I got married, I had friends that sat down with professionals and talked about what a relationship is, what love is, what faithfulness is. And a lot of people don't have that. I didn't have it growing up. But when I look back at that and I look at their marriages and I'm like, oh, that was a really cool strategy. It was a really cool tool to sit down with a third party and say, hey, what are we getting into here? What does it mean to be married? You know, and I think it comes to education on some level. What do you think about that?
I think you're spot on. So so if we look at the causes of infidelity under the
Right.
relationship factors, a
Okay.
common one I see with couples is the lack of relationship maturity. Relationship maturity is
Yep.
what you described, is having the skill set and the knowledge to know if you're ready for a relationship, to know how to start a relationship and how to maintain it and grow and adapt with it. So, how do people get relationship maturity? There's two main sources. One is what's being modeled to you in your family of origin. And I would say majority of people, unfortunately, are not lucky in that department. Most people, they don't have a good model in their household. That tend to be the minority. The second source of gaining relationship maturity is the type of adult relationship people are engaged in prior to the current relationship that
Mm,
they're coming to see you for. So if you have somebody who grew up in a household where infidelity was a commonplace, or maybe communication or conflict resolution was not modeled, right? They're already going to be starting a relationship with a disadvantage. Or somebody might have been in a few relationship that were awful and bad and taught them some bad lessons. They can carry some of these bad lessons to their new relationship. So you're spot on about the lack of education. Uh, I think something as simple as what is infidelity, so that is so basic.
yeah.
If you ask most people what does that mean, a lot of people are going to struggle and come up with a congruent answer that works for everybody.
Yeah. I feel like we're kind of touching on generational patterns. You know, when you look at a family that may come from a broken home, do you see patterns there? Is it easier for a child that comes from a set of divorced parents to follow in those same patterns?
That's a great question. I've seen family origin actually have impact in both directions, right? So if you say
Mm,
if you come from a broken home, that doesn't mean that that everybody who's coming from that place is going to be doomed in terms of their success and failure in a
right.
relationship. It's certainly going to play an impact and how they saw conflict being handled in that household. But also I've seen household where where the adult clients report, oh, my childhood was great. Okay, tell me how great was your childhood. Well, my parents never fought at all, right?
Mm,
So it could err on the other side of, I think it's good that a healthy couple, you should not be exposing your kids to your drama, right? If you're having conflict, have it behind closed doors. But that doesn't mean you show them a fake version of a relationship, right? Because a
yeah.
healthy relationship is not a perfect relationship. Conflict is normal part of life, right? And sometimes people err on that side of, it seems like everything looks good on paper, right? The parents are happy and right, cute and all that stuff, but you have
Yep.
kids who grow up with no skill set, or that they're frustrated when they're, God forbid, their partner have a different opinion, and for them, it's like they had a completely different set of reality of what relationship should look like. So it can go both ways.
Yeah. I labeled this particular podcast the nature of trust, and the for me that I've been dying to ask you is that, trust, once broken, can be incredibly difficult to repair. Is trust something that can ever fully be restored, or does infidelity permanently alter the very definition of trust in a relationship?
Great question. Let's see. I think based on how we define trust, so trust within
Right.
the context of infidelity recovery is, how do I know this won't happen again? That's the
Yep.
$1 million question that the betrayed
Yep.
have, and sometimes unfaithful. And to me, it's cause and effect. Infidelity doesn't happen in a vacuum. If you take the time and effort to really do an autopsy of the affair, you will be able to come up with all the reason why it happened. So the only way for people to rebuild trust after discovering infidelity is by being able to understand the type of infidelity that took place, the reason why it happened, and seeing concrete evidence of those reasons being resolved, right? Anything short of that is wishful thinking. That's anything short of that is like, not the real kind of forgiveness, not the real kind of rebuilding trust. So if you see the unfaithful and the betrayed redeem themselves from the shortcomings that have led to the infidelity, right? Then you can say we can rebuild trust. Now, is it going to be the same, right? That's again, so sometimes couples feel like, okay, we can never have the same relationship that we had prior to this. Have we have not known about the affair, our life would be completely different. But we have to take a look at this: is that the relationship that people had prior to the affair, chances are, wasn't the healthiest relationship, right? Because even if the affair happened because of individual issue that faithful is dealing with versus a relationship deficit, that wasn't a 100% relationship. Having that affair happen actually allow people to take a look at these things that they ignored or they think they
Mm.
didn't know existed. So you can make an argument that if they do the work, they will end up with the better, healthier relationship than they had before, because now they're building a relationship on truth, on transparency, and a full disclosure about what they're up against. So I think you can actually make the relationship even better than it was prior to the discovery of the affair. Now, that's not going to be the case for everyone, because sometimes the infidelity is a signal that this relationship shouldn't have been there in the first place, which bring up my other soapbox about what should be the purpose of couples counseling. I don't think the purpose of couples counseling is to repair a relationship. Am I an advocate for people repairing their relationship? Of course I am. I mean, who doesn't want people to repair their relationship? But we have to accept that not all relationships should survive. Some relationships shouldn't have started in the first place. The purpose of counseling, couples counseling in general, and the purpose of infidelity recovery in particular, is to help people get unstuck. And you do that by giving them the information that they need to make that choice. And I also don't think it's the therapist's job to choose for them, right? It's not my relationship. My job is to give you the information that you need to make an informed decision about which direction that you're going to go. And if you're going to go rebuilding the relationship, then my job is to give you the tools to not only identify the factors that led to infidelity, but concrete ways of how to make sure that you don't find yourself in that situation again.
Wow. Like that particular insight is something you almost never hear, is this idea that infidelity could lead to an evolution of growth that you might not have ever had unless you face that particular instance. Like that's mind-blowing to me. It also brings up a lot of complexity and makes me think about, a lot, how difficult it is to have this sort of issue of trust. Like, what, this person cheated on me, but I have my kids, I'm going to stay together because I think it's the right thing to do. But in reality, you're just ignoring the gaping hole in your relationship and refusing to see it on some level. It's really complex, right?
It is, and that's when, even when I get my consultation calls with clients and ask them about what are they hoping to accomplish, right? There are a lot of people who say, well, we're calling you because we want to repair the relationship. I say that's fine, that's nice. I'm not gonna get in the way of that. If that is going to be in your guys' trajectory, we will get there, right? I'm not gonna go against it
Right.
or for it, but you have to enter that process with both options, that this could actually work and this could mean that we go our separate ways. And really, trauma is the catalyst for change, right? And
Yeah.
the change and the growth can be for the relationship and it being better, or for people to individually heal, because not everybody's going to be able and willing to do what it takes to rebuild trust. It's just as simple as that. And I think,
Yeah.
there's a part of us where, even I think clinicians are guilty of this, where you think that, your success rate is by, how many people repair their relationship. That's a false that's a false metric. And also that's ignoring the fact that, sometimes counseling can be that catalyst also to tell people that, hey, there's a big compatibility issue that's not going to go away, or if you're going to stay just for the sake of the kids. uh,
Mm.
and the way I sell this for my client about the kids piece is that, your job as a parent is to showcase what healthy relationship for your kids so that they can be successful adults. So if you're in this devoid of trust marriage, what kind of message that you're sending for them? Yeah, they don't have to have split schedules, but like, you're not really preparing them to have a healthy relationship in adulthood. That cannot be a reason. That can be a secondary reason, but that cannot be a primary reason for rebuilding the relationship. And that's one of the milestones that I actually help my clients go through, is to assess their motivation. If you're wanting to rebuild, why do you want to rebuild? And then here's, it's even more tricky. A lot of times people think that this is the decision that the betrayed, have to think about. Should I stay? Should I leave? Well, no. Both people have to ask themselves that question. And sometimes the one who's on the fence is the unfaithful, not the betrayed, which create a whole different dynamics in the therapy environment.
Do you do you see the relationship model as like a three-piece model? Like you have the husband, the wife, and then the relationship? And if so, is the relationship greater than the individuals?
Mm. I truly believe that relationships that we form with our significant other takes a life of its own. It becomes its own
Yeah,
organism. And I always, have the analogy, if it's a plant that the two of you created together, how you treat it, how you water it, how you nurture it is going to either
right.
help it grow or not. So I see them like interlinked. I see the relationship as the crowning achievement of the contribution of both people. Think of it as that this is the child of
Yeah.
this relationship. What kind of child do you have, and what does that say about the effort that you're putting in your readiness to have this child in the world? Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. It's a beautiful way to describe it, and I'm gonna write it down so that I can start thinking about it in that way. Thank you for that. It's I don't think you can talk about betrayal without talking about forgiveness. And there's a really big psychology around forgiveness. I've spoken to people and I've been impacted by infidelity where, something happens in a relationship and the person will never forgive them, or the person wants to go out and then cheat and then they'll forgive them. But maybe you could speak to this idea of forgiveness in the idea of infidelity.
Sure. I guess to start off, what does forgiveness mean to you? If I ask you to define forgiveness, what would you say?
Forgiveness for me is the idea that you understand the reason why a transgression was made, and you can have enough empathy to understand why that was made. You won't forget it, but you can say, listen, if I was in that situation, I'm not sure what I would have done. I can understand why they did that. And forgiveness for me would be to have empathy, to understand it, and then realize that I am no longer going to harbor angry feelings because those angry feelings only hurt me.
Excellent. You have like all the main components of that aspect. And the reason I ask, because I want to do a juxtaposition, when
Yeah,
oftentimes when people
please.
think of forgiveness in from the betrayed and unfaithful perspective, a lot of things that I have to detangle is similar to what you said. One, forgiveness doesn't. If I forgive you, it does not mean that I'm actually going to be in the relationship with you. I could forgive you and still not want to be in a relationship with you. That's one.
Yes.
Forgiveness doesn't also mean forgetting, because you can never forget something as awful
Yes.
as infidelity happened to you. The best that you can hope for is that that memory will become a distant thing in your rear view mirror, right? As you're driving, the further you drive in your road of recovery, the further it's going to be away, the less negative impact it's going to have on your life. But also, forgiveness is something that you cannot just wave a magic wand and say you are forgiven. I see it as an act of redemption, and not in the spiritual sense, even though I'm using spiritual language because that's the closest word that kind of convey that aspect. For me, in order for somebody to earn forgiveness for themselves, from themselves, and from their partner, because there's also two components, right? You have to demonstrate that you have resolved the shortcomings that led you to be in this situation, right? If
Yeah.
you're not able to do that, then in my book you have not, redeemed yourself from the shortcomings. So it is tied to what you do after you find out that thing, and show consistently with your action that you became a different individual, a better individual other than that. So to me, that's a metric for forgiveness, and it's something that you have to earn from your partner if you're the unfaithful. But also, that's something that you have to be willing to give to yourself at some point of time.
Yeah, it's really well said. The idea of redemption and earning it. Sometimes when I think about infidelity, especially in a world today that's just, we spoke about the media, or sometimes we can see on some level there's like this porn addiction out there. Like porn is everywhere. Do you see that, like maybe porn, or is infidelity, is there a difference between infidelity and emotional betrayal?
Mm. So I guess first of all we'll have to start with defining infidelity, right? And
Okay.
and please
Yes.
remind me to bring up the porn if I forget about that part.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the first puzzle that I had to solve when I went on this journey of trying to understand infidelity is to come up with an operational definition for infidelity that works for all my clients who come from different backgrounds, different religious
Yep.
group, different cultural belief system, and different type of relationships. And when I began to look at the literature, I realized that even researchers cannot agree on what is the operational definition of infidelity, and that's crazy to me because everything that we think and we know about infidelity, we have to redo again, right? Because the
Yeah.
data is skewed based on how you define it, right?
Yep.
So here's my definition of infidelity that I came up with, and the context I will provide to explain that definition. I really believe that all relationships should operate as a business partnerships, meaning that we need to know what kind of partnership is this, how many partners we have in this relationship. Is it one? Is it two? Is it 20? What are
Right.
the emotional and physical needs that we're expecting our partners to fulfill? And to what extent the fulfillment of those needs is exclusive to the partners that we have in this relationship contract. So the moment a person in the relationship outsources the fulfillment of any of those needs, big or small, to somebody else outside of this relationship contract without consent, I am breaching my contract of exclusivity. And that breach of contract of exclusivity, big or small, becomes the threshold for infidelity. And this is really
Mm.
crucial for couples and clinicians to be on the same page on, because trust and believe, when your client's showing up to your office, they need a rolling. Is what happened infidelity or something else? And your job, you have to weigh in to say, is this infidelity
Yeah.
or not? Because if it's infidelity and you called it something else, they said that, oh, this is just inappropriate poor behavior, then you minimize the big problem, right? And you
Yeah.
can make the argument for the opposite direction. So the defining infidelity in that sense means that infidelity is just simply sexual acts that you conduct in person. It's also emotional needs that you and your partner have expected to have exclusivity in that department. And it's a lot difficult for people to wrap their mind about emotional exclusivity because we are used to having other people fulfill our emotional needs, right? Like, we have friends, you have family
Yeah.
members, they fulfill some of our emotional needs. So the parameters of exclusivity is going to be a lot harder to pinpoint in that aspect. And the reason what I found with that definition being helpful is that, one, it gives me a moral buffer between me and my client. So if they're asking Talal to weigh in, is this infidelity or not? And Talal says yes, it is. It's not because this is Talal belief system. This is not because Talal personal view on what's right or wrong. This is based on your unique relationship contract as a couple. And this is a good way to nail down faithful on that aspect and have them actually be able to admit that what they did infidelity, because most of the time people either explicitly or implicitly know what was supposed to be exclusive for them. And it makes
Yeah.
it easier to actually help the couple begin to understand what kind of problem that we are working on. Now, if we take this, take a look at, we asked me about pornography. So
Yeah.
uh, porn addiction can lead to infidelity in two main ways. There are others, but I'm going to share the main ways that I have seen through
Okay.
research as well as through my work with clients. So the first way is the sexual script that we operate on. If you look at the majority of the pornography material that's being made, it does not portray monogamous exclusive sex. Oftentimes it's group sex, pizza delivery guy, all these things, right? It's
Right.
a lot of infidelity narrative too, which means that as the viewer, you begin to be interacting with these sexual scripts. You begin to have these
Right.
fantasies, right? So it does impact your view about sexuality, what you find exciting, because you are bombarded by sexual situations that are not replicating, real life or monogamy or exclusivity. If you take a look at the other factor, is the compare and contrast. So everything that happens in the porn world is not real world. Everything's airbrushed. Attributes that people have, they're not what you see often in real life. So when people interact with this material, they begin to compare and contrast their attributes, their partner attributes, as well as the quality of the sexual interaction with what they see in the porn. And what people forget, that this is not real, that this is a fantasy, right? And oftentimes people become dissatisfied with themselves or with their partner because of what they're viewing, and that might cause them to seek similar interaction that they see in the porn outside of the relationship, or want to be with somebody who looks like the people that they see in the pornography. Not only that, but also sometimes people utilize masturbation and pornography as the main way for fulfilling sexual needs. It is not supposed to be the main way for fulfilling sexual needs. It's supposed to be a secondary, right? When your partner
Mm.
is not available. But if you have a partner who is ready and willing and you don't have sex with them and you'd rather watch pornography, that tells me there's something, that we need to look at this relationship. Why are you not utilizing the outlet that
Yeah.
the primary outlet is supposed to be for the relationship, and you're going to the secondary outlet?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's interesting to see that as a symptom of the sickness that is plaguing us on some level. It's great. We got a comment that comes in from the great Hank Foley, and he says correlate active religious practice of various types with the co-occurrence of infidelity. My own observation has been that the more fundamental the belief set amongst Christians, perhaps paradoxically, the more likely infidelity will occur at any time during the marriage. Does the square W does that square with your experience? Also, I'm sure you've dealt with couples for whom the only infidelity is typically that of the male.
Let me see in terms of what does this mean. Let's see. More fundamental, so I guess I'm figuring out what's the best way to interpret this before I give my answer. Is it really more along the lines of being prepared that this is something that's going to happen in your relationship, makes it easier for it not to happen?
I think so.
Okay. So I guess one way I can answer this from talking about the impact of spirituality and religiosity, maybe that will help address this piece.
Yeah.
Research shows that people who have spiritual belief systems that
Hmm.
discourage infidelity or frown upon infidelity tend to have lower prevalence rates of infidelity, because part of their moral compass, it is really important for them, and there is a buy-in that I should not be doing this. There is some aspect to that. Flip side of this too, oftentimes a lot of these spiritual belief systems tend to have a very rigid view on sexuality and sexual
Hmm.
exploration. So it can create a different problem by creating unrealistic expectations. So a classic example that I see often enough with folks who grew up in a belief system with a very strong moral compass, with maybe an emphasis on discouraging sexual exploration prior to getting married. I've seen a lot of people where the lack of exploration was a major cause for infidelity because they didn't figure out who they are, right? Maybe they didn't discover an orientation that they should have been aware of, and they didn't get to explore that. And now they escalated their commitment to somebody, they got married, have kids, and later on they're struggling with this thing they did not explore. So I can see it backfiring in that aspect. Uh, uh, but bringing it back to the questions about the pornography and leading to, that's a leading cause for males to come in treatment. Uh, I think watching pornography in itself can also be the threshold of infidelity in some relationship. Now, I personally, as a clinician, I don't have a moral view about pornography for or against. There are a lot of research that shows specific type of pornography viewing with certain parameters can actually be a healthy tool for couples when it comes to intimacy. But that's not for everybody. I would say the majority of people, the pornography viewing is really more on the negative aspect versus the positive aspect. So sometimes, let's say if you have a couple where the relationship contract, there was an expectation of exclusivity as the partner. I'm not okay with you getting arousal and sexual satisfaction from somebody else, even if that somebody else is a video or a magazine, right? If that's my relationship contract and I'm watching pornography, then I'm already breaching that threshold if this was the type of relationship exclusivity that I signed up for. But also, when people start dysfunction, right? Let's say that pornography was a form of infidelity. and I know that this was, if I know that this was a form of infidelity in my marriage and I did it anyway, eventually dysfunction is going to increase. So nobody wakes up one morning to say, I'm going to jump in the deep end of infidelity, to the deep end, the deep end pool of the
Yeah.
infidelity. A lot of times it start with poor boundaries, blurring those boundaries, and it escalate, right? Because whatever we started to fulfill a need is not going to be enough, and we need to amp it up. So it becomes a slippery slope. There
Yeah.
is no such thing as a small act of infidelity or a big act of infidelity. Eventually, it will get bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not going to go away on its own. And if it does, it's not for the right reason. It's because something happened, fizzled out because maybe somebody had to move or go to a different location.
Do you think, in your opinion, and does the number of sexual partners you have before getting into a relationship affect infidelity? Is there a higher rate of people who have more partners before marriage or have less partners before marriage, or is that just anecdotal?
I think it plays a part, but not always in the race, because numbers of partners doesn't mean that the person had adequate experience. What I look for
Mm,
is adequate, healthy experience, and I don't think that's
right.
something you can quantify by number, because you could have somebody who have multiple sex partners, and the theme of those relationship that they were never fulfilled, right? Maybe the other
Right.
partners were getting the fulfillment. Now you have a person who just now learned that they're the best thing that they can offer to the world is their body, when in reality that's, you could argue they have number of experiences,
Yeah.
but the number of experiences did not really teach them who they are and what they should look for. I think really the quality of those previous experiences versus the quantity is what I would invest in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, what about, I have written down here, the infidelity as a death and a rebirth. You have helped many couples navigate the wreckage left behind by affairs. Do you see infidelity as a kind of death and rebirth of a relationship? And for couples that successfully rebuild after an affair, is the new relationship ever truly the same, or does it become something else entirely?
It is absolutely a death and rebirth for the relationship, and I would say even it's a death and rebirth for the individual too, because
Right?
a lot of times, believe it or not, the unfaithful partner is shocked and appalled about what they were capable of, right? Because a lot of times we have this assumption that people who are unfaithful or cheating, they're just, immoral people, they don't have moral compass. That is not the case. Now, granted, those people exist, but that's not the majority of unfaithful partners. A lot of these folks are good, decent human beings, right? Like, you caught them in a very awful, 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 horrendous chapter in their life. That chapter does not mean that they're lacking morals. But being able to, again, if people decide to rebuild for the right reason and they actually address the individual, relational, and the environmental factors that led to infidelity, it's going to give them a better relationship than they ever had before. And there are many couples where, if you see the videos from them in the early phase of treatment, in the middle, and the late phase, you see that transition. And for both of them, the betrayed and the unfaithful, to report that, I can't believe that, we ended up with a better relationship we had before, because it seemed like an outlandish thing that, something as awful infidelity could lead to something greater. But I always give the analogy of heart attacks, right?
Yeah.
So most of us know that you need to eat well and exercise to get better, right? But not everybody is going to actually take the time and effort to do that. Unless somebody get a scary diagnosis, hey, you have a heart attack, you're going to die if you don't eat and eat well and exercise. Now, some people still double down to say, you know what, I live this way, I may as well just going to go, right? But the majority of people, this would be like, okay, this is a serious wake up call. If I really want to live, I need to eat better, I need to exercise. The same thing with infidelity. I would say most people, they usually know there's something broken in the relationship, or there is something individually within them that they haven't fixed, but they don't take care of it. Whether it's they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, or maybe they think it's not severe enough for it to deal with it. When infidelity happened, it is like a heart attack for the relationship. Now is the time for you to actually decide: are you going to do your best, or are you going to continue the same thing that you're doing? So if you get this golden opportunity, like, look, here's what's broken, here's how you need to fix it, and you rise up to the occasion, you're going to be the best version of yourself in that relationship. So to me, that's the silver lining of infidelity. But also, let's say that you actually opt for not being in the relationship. Now you're free from this burden that you've been tied to all these years, and now you actually have the time to live the healthy life and maybe find the healthy relationship that you deserve instead of just continuing to do the same thing.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's interesting that we say faithful or faithless, and I can't help, and Hank brings up another good point here about the idea of like fundamentalist or even tight religious structures seem to sometimes prohibit sex. Like if we look back at, we can see it in literature, or we can see it in
Yeah.
some sort of cults sometimes, or fundamentalist Christians, or different Jews or Muslims or Sikhs. They have like these different containers of religion. How do you think that these rigid containers play a part in infidelity, or do they?
Hmm. So let me take a look at it from. I'll answer it from one aspect that was actually
Okay.
important for me, and maybe
Okay.
this will help me with that other one. One thing that you will notice, because this is when I did my research with the cross cultural aspect and what do other religions and
Right.
societies, how they handle infidelity, and I would
Right.
say the majority of societies, right, they have some religious taboo or discouragement of infidelity to the point of severe punishment,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
uh, and to me that's an indication of what, that infidelity, it's a problem that doesn't just impact the people in the committed relationship. It impact them, it impact their kids, impact their
Yep.
family and society. It's the devastating impact when infidelity is discovered. It ruins so many different lives,
Yep.
even in the most classic easy, let's just you know uh, a husband and a wife from both sides, they both cheated on their partner, and now think about their families and friends and this ripple impact that just impact
Yep.
everybody else. So I think there's one aspect of that in terms of why there's some religious taboos against infidelity. I think because people intrinsically knew some betrayal can cause a rip in society. Not even if you're thinking about lineage lines and inheritance and all that stuff. I think there is a
Right.
utility aspect from that part, but I think also the crimes that happens, the crimes of passion that happens.
Yep.
Heck, there are some countries where even murder motivated by discovery of error, where you get a lighter sentences. I mean, it's that's
Yep.
it's a society went to that level to discourage people from engaging in it. Now, I do think so spiritual belief system can be a container for a positive aspect of teaching the value of being honest with yourself, the value of integrity, the value of treat others of how you want to be treated, where it can discourage people. But I feel like it all has to do with your relationship with your belief system. If it's a belief system that you have an internal buy-in and it does not conflict with who you are, then it can be a positive thing and can be a protective factor against infidelity. But if it's a belief system that's been thrusted upon you, and I think most people, there are a lot of people where you're just born into the faith, right? Where you just do it because this is what your family done versus that you chose that faith. I think that makes a difference, because I think if fidelity in a relationship is a value for you, if it's an intrinsic value, then you're going to comply regardless of who's watching and who's not watching. But if you're just doing it because that's what you're supposed to do, your compliance is going to be sketchy, right? Your compliance is going to be
Yeah.
weak. Not only that, but let's say that your religious belief system goes against who you are as an individual. Let's say that you're a person who is not heterosexual, right? You identify as
Right.
bi or homosexual, and you're part of a belief system where that's a no-go, and you end up being in a heterosexual relationship, and despite your best effort, you're not going to be fulfilled, and your partner is not going to be fulfilled. In those situations, people have to really choose what's congruent with who they are versus what being told who they should be.
Yeah, it's such an interesting concept to think about our relationship to sex. It's this incredible emotional driver that has to do with power and desire and encouragement and lust, and like it. Do you is this something that you think the human condition will ever outgrow? Or is this something that is in us for the long haul? Like, do you ever forecast a time? Like sometimes when you read books, you'll see like Brave New World, where they write about changing the attitude towards sex, or free love in the 60s and 70s. Like, do you think we're moving towards a more a different model of sex in the human condition?
Mm. I'm trying to figure out if I should answer this as a pessimist or an optimist. I'll go with genuine because for me,
Okay.
authentic is always a win. Um, I don't, and maybe this is occupational hazard where you maybe change your perspective about the world and humanity. I'll take ownership of that. Capacity for change. I do think people are capable of change. I think what I worry about is our ego as humans that will get in the way of making those change. I think in order for us to transcend our human limitations, we have to be willing to take a real hard look about who we are and what we can and cannot do right now. If we're able to accept that, then it will pave a pathway for us to actually be better. But I think most of the times, I think there's a big gap between our biological evolution and cultural evolution. That if you ask me,
Right.
that's what I would put my money on, right? Despite how intelligent we think we are and how we have tamed the planet and all of these things,
Yeah.
we still have a lot of wired in primate traits that we still
Yeah.
struggle with, and sometimes the disconnect is between our biological nature and our cultural intellectual evolution. I think there's a gap between the two that we haven't been able to reconcile yet. But I think if we're able to accept that everybody's capable of doing something as awful as infidelity, right? Maybe you'll temper some of that hubris, right? About that, just because things are going great and have things functional in different aspects, that does not mean you're immune to it, right? Maybe that you will force us to not be on autopilot in our relationship and our exploration of ourselves. Because I really feel in order for people not to be in this situation, first of all, you have to be consistently learning about who you are and the
Yeah.
changes that goes within you, right? If you're aware of those changes and how you evolve as a person, and if you realize that the way you're evolving might not be congruent with the relationship that you're in and the parameters of exclusivity, you can have that conversation with your partner, right? Hey, look, I used to be this and now I'm that, right? What do we do about this? Can we still be together? Can we still be in this relationship contract? Is there room for us to grow in the same direction? The answer is yes, great. We can continue and grow and adapt. The answer is no, at least we can separate versus, trying to cross those lines of fidelity, end up with heartaches and hurt for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard an interesting quote yesterday that said sexual energy is creative energy. And I'm wondering to get your thoughts on that. It seems to me that when we start looking at like the creative process, it's a lot of that same energy. Do you think that maybe we'd be a more creative society if we had like less sex?
Hmm. I think it really has to do with our individual relationship. What does sex mean to us, right? I
Right.
think it really goes to the narrative that we told about to ourselves. What is the role of sex? What value does it bring to me? What cost does it
Yeah.
take out of our life? I think, at least on the biological level, we can say there is, a biological imperative aspect related to procreation that kind of drive the machine. There's the excitement, arousals, and all these things.
Yeah.
But I think also, we're at a stage in our human evolution where we put all these non-physical biological things about sex. Now we see it as a sign of desire. We see it as a sign of
Yeah.
wealth. See it as a sign of power.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I feel like all of these things that we assign to sex, they're subjective and they change, right? I mean, even
Yeah.
something like if you look in different cultures where in order for you to be the priest or the priestess, you have to be somebody who's never had sex, so as a purity thing.
Yeah.
So I think I'm not saying these things doesn't have validity. I think these things are the values we assign to sex is a reflection of what type of humans we have living in that world
Mm,
at that time. It's a snapshot of how we
yeah.
see our place in the world. But I think it's ever changing, which maybe that actually paint a pathway for hope about can we see it differently? I think it depends on what stories we tell ourselves about what sex and what it's supposed to be. I mean, you could also make an
Yeah.
argument. You can do a dystopian sci-fi future where sex seems like, oh, people. I think a lot of movies actually played with that. Say, oh, only primates have actual sex. We don't do that
Yeah.
anymore. We just do intellectual telepathy.
Yeah. Hank brings up a good point. And I'm curious, as someone who has written multiple books on it and has a deep insight about it, is the incidence of infidelity different in the United States that it is throughout the rest of the world?
Mm. I would say that. So here's the thing: when you look at the literature, you're going to find
Yeah,
some data that is not data that's good enough from my perspective because of how they're operating, how what operation
right,
definition that they're using. And we also have to keep in mind that also the cross-cultural is limited because in some cultures you
right.
can't even admit that you have infidelity. It's shameful. So that's going to skew that. I can tell you for a fact based on the relationship between the cultural norms and infidelity, yeah, of course, it's going to be play a different factor because the United States is its own unique. You can make that argument about every country, but I think
Yeah,
maybe you can say maybe United States has tend to have the advantage of influencing bigger part of the world. There are a lot of people who want to emulate the American way and influenced by it. So I think you might see some of that trickle effect in those other cultures. But I think the beliefs and the way people live and what's expected socially acceptable or not is going to play a factor. I'll give you something similar to
yeah,
that. Occupation. Like I said, you're familiar with a website called Ashley Madison?
yeah.
Okay. So for the viewers who don't know what Ashley Madison is, a website for people who want to have affairs. I think in
Right,
2014 there was a data breach to the website
right.
that gave the researchers like a golden opportunity to figure out what type of people actually end up having affairs, right? And they when they're analyzing the data, they found that there are certain type of jobs where infidelity seems to be more prevalent. Those jobs, people in the military, people who are first responders, people who are in sales. Why would I bring this up? Because there are some occupational environment where cheating is not frowned upon. We're actually seeing that this is what everybody does. I work with people from different walks of life. Common thing that I see with CEOs and executive, a
Mm,
lot of times when I say, okay, like why did you think it was okay to do this? He said, well, it's a perk. This is what you get when you get to that level. Like, everybody who's a captain of industry has a mistress, or like that's just the norm, right? So if you look at this from a global society, if you live in a culture where almost everybody that cheated or cheated on, you see it on TV everywhere, guess what social messaging that you're going to get? That this is probably not a big deal. Like, this is something that's a commonplace. It's just like a garden variety. So I do
mm,
think to some extent that makes it easier for people to not think so much about the consequences. Or they think, well, if it get discovered, our neighbor cheated, or best friend so and so cheated, and they seem to be okay. So I do think sometimes it play a factor in normalizing those kind of behaviors and minimizing the fear about consequences.
yeah, it's a great point. It's just, can it ever be like preemptive? Do you think that are you able to preempt it on some level? Like maybe people were having feelings about it and they come to you, or do you see that as a strategy on some level?
What you to explain in a different way? When you say preemptive, meaning like that they would actually try to seek help before they cross those lines.
Yeah, exactly.
I have yet to receive a call where somebody says, "Hey, I'm struggling with infidelity."
Yeah.
Right? Oftentimes, the closest that I get to that is a call to say, "Hey, I've been cheating on my partner. Right? It's bugging me. Right? I want to work on it, but I don't want to tell my partner." And
Mm,
and that brings up another thing about the infidelity recovery. You cannot do infidelity recovery successfully with one person. It just does not
right.
work, right? So and then my conversation with that person, if you really want to heal, right, you're gonna have to be willing to tell your partner. Well, why do I have to tell them? This is just gonna hurt them. I can
Right.
take this to the
Right.
grave. Logistically, I truly believe whether this is a divine intervention or just way of the world works. I don't know how that part works, but one thing that I have learned is that the truth always come to the surface, like karmically, and it comes out in
Yeah.
very weird, bizarre ways. Common example: years ago, you and I never thought that there will be a world where this 23andMe and DNA testing, that wasn't even something on that I, at least when I was growing up, I didn't think that we're going to have the technology where we're just going to do this,
Right.
right? So I would say at least 3 times a year, or maybe 4 times a year, I get a call from somebody who says, guess what? We've been married for 20, 30 years, and one of our kids did a DNA test and found out that this person is not my kid. So like you have all this relationship where people thought, I could take this to my grave, not knowing that one day there will be technology where one of their kids for Christmas trying to find out their roots, and now they destroy the whole family, right? So truth always find a way to the surface. So if you really want to repair the relationship or be better, it start by owning up to that. Or, I mean, just the whole idea of STIs, right? And the risk that you can give to someone. So I think really, it's unfortunate to see all the missed opportunities that people had, because when we do the autopsy for the affair and why
Right.
this happened, it is tragic to see, like, I could have done this, I could have done that. Here's all this different exit on the freeway that I missed. And really, that's why my advice to people, if you're not happy with yourself, you're not happy with your relationship, what you need to do is pause and figure out, hey, what are we doing, and is this something that can be fixed? If you do that, you're going to be more successful in having a chance to maintain what you have, assuming it's maintainable. But I'd rather that a relationship end versus,
Yeah.
end after cheating. That's more devastating.
Yeah, it is. Dr. Talal, I walked you right up to this hour right here. How you doing on time?
I am good. We can go as much as you need.
Okay. Um, Infidelity as a mirror of the self. Like you kind of touched on that a little bit. Like the idea that maybe this infidelity that's happening may not be a direct reflection of the inadequacies of the relationship. Maybe it's a direct reflection of the inadequacies you feel about yourself. Maybe you can dig into that a little bit.
Absolutely. So we'll use the type of unfaithful who, let's say, where this happened because of a narcissistic personality
Yeah.
disorder.
Yep.
So why would a narcissist? What is the correlation between narcissism and infidelity?
Mm,
Somebody who's a narcissist, they're going to be needing constant attention, and they might be somebody who have a partner who's giving them attention that they need at home, but it's never going to be enough from one person. They need it from multiple sources.
mm,
So it doesn't matter what relationship they're in. It doesn't matter how great their partner is treating them. It's not a one person's job. They're going to be seeking that no matter what relationship that they're in. And I mean, that's a reflection of that person's symptoms and their need to actually address it. What makes it more challenging? Do you hear about the term egosyntonic, egodystonic?
no, I don't know those.
Okay, so there's two types of mental healthy symptoms, two categories. If we're looking at it
Okay.
broadly, egosyntonic and egodystonic, meaning that one of them means that some mental health condition, people are aware that there's something wrong that they need to fix, right? They know that there's something is broken. And there's the other one where, like, no, they're okay. They have no clinical distress. Their problem is that the world is not on the same page. There are certain types of personality disorders, such as narcissistic personality disorders and antisocial personality disorder. They're the type of mental health issues where the person is okay with who they are. They have no clinical distress whatsoever. Their problem is that the world is not going on that same page, right? So if you're a narcissist, it's going to be a struggle for you to actually want to change that, because you're happy with who
Mm,
you are. You're not happy that other people are not playing the roles that you expect them to play, which makes it challenging and resistant for treatment. Or sometimes, give an example, and that's what I love so much about my discoveries in those fields. We all know that trauma or sexual trauma can impact somebody in a negative way, but this was
right.
one of my light bulb moments to see how often sexual trauma exposed when somebody's exposed to it as a
Mm,
child, to what's
yeah.
that there's a huge correlation of infidelity in adult relationship. And if you think about it, it makes sense. And on the stories often that I hear, the gist of it is something along the lines of somebody got sexually abused as a child. They never
Right.
got the proper treatment, or maybe when they tried to disclose, they didn't get the support. They were blamed by the parents, right? That
Yep.
change how they change their view of sexuality, right? They might end up being more promiscuous, because that's one of the negative trajectory of sexual abuse, was not being treated well. So now this person grow up with an idea that all they offer to the world is their body, right? And I'm only
Mm.
good for that because historically, this is what I have been used for. So, classic example that I see often and often again, you have an unfaithful female partner who, let's say that she's experiencing an emotional deficit in her relationship. Their sex life is great from the physical aspect, but there is no emotional intimacy, right?
Mm.
So she might not be interested in having an affair for the sex part. She might be interested in having an affair with somebody who says you're good enough, I like you,
Yeah.
right? They're interested in an emotional aspect. But the other person who you're engaging in your affair, they have their own motivation. They might not want the emotional aspect. They might want you just for the sex part, right? So in order for me to get that emotional feedback that I need from you, that's lacking from my relationship, I have to give you what you want, even though I'm not interested in the sex part. So now I have to cross the emotional and the sexual lines of fidelity just to get this emotional needs being fulfilled for me. So something as sexual trauma that has been that happened in the past could set the stage for infidelity in the current relationship or amplify some of the relationship deficit that could causes infidelity. So really, like then when you look at the individual factors, uh, and that's why spending a lot of times on the story of the affair and the type of reason happened is instrumental for people to decide, do we want to work on the relationship or not? Because from the betrayed perspective, they might say, okay, if this happened because of an individual issue, this has nothing to do with me. This is a you problem. Maybe it's less soft blow to the ego. We'll get you the help you need. Maybe this won't happen again. For other betrayed partners, say, well, I have no control whether or not you're going to fix that issue. If this was a relationship deficit, maybe I'll have more wiggle room because I can do my part to be happy, to make you happy and fulfill your needs. So it's interesting how that also is based on people worldview. That's what's fixable and what's not fixable.
Yeah. Is difference between someone who cheats one time and someone who cheats multiple times? Is one relationship more repairable versus the other?
Mm. So there's this myth that once a cheater, always a cheater,
Right,
right?
right. Yeah.
And I'm gonna say those people exist. So I'm not saying those people don't exist, but they're not the majority. I would say that the
Okay.
once a cheater, always a cheater, oftentimes tend to be the folks with personality disorders because they're resistant to change. Uh, the specific details of the infidelity and the unique circumstances does play a factor, but there is no hard and rule, you know, that you can apply to everybody, right? It's unique for that each couple, right? And I would say the common theme is what almost every betrayed wish the story was different, right? And it's interesting for me because I have the
Yeah.
vantage point to see all the different stories from different levels of infidelity. I've seen people struggle when there was just a one night stand influenced by alcohol versus somebody
Yeah.
who repeatedly slept with 20 or 30 people multiple times. I think at the end of the day, it is subjective. Now,
Mm.
granted, the frequency of the numbers, right? It's going to affect how the betrayed conceptualize the possibility for hope. Because if you've been cheating for the last 5 years, at least 3 or 4 times a month, and you're telling me all of a sudden I'm going to give that up, I'm going to struggle. Like, how are you going to give up this habit that you had for 5 years?
Yeah.
Right? So it does play that impact and play an impact in terms of the potential risk and consequences that they bring to home, right? Did they get somebody pregnant? Did they bring an STI? Are they going to lose their business because they slept with somebody at work that they're not supposed to? So I think those can be a factor in terms of the impact, the negative impact that's being brought to the relationship and how the betrayed conceptualize the chances for healing. But as a clinician, I think you cannot say just because it happened this many times that this person is doomed for failure. Now, also, we have to factor in, did this person, because somebody might say, okay, well, you're a cheater, you cheated on your past 3 relationships, right?
Mm.
Well, cheating in every relationship is going to be different for different reasons. Now, sometimes there is a common theme, but
Right.
also we have to look at it within that context.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the ideas of patterns. And one of the patterns that I see sometimes in people that I speak with, or sometimes the articles that I've read, is like language patterns. And I'm wondering, as someone who has been in this field for so long, are you able to begin to see signs in couples' language patterns, the words they use, the phrases they use, the intent they have in their language? Can you see it in those language patterns when you see people?
What is it that I see in language patterns? What specifically you're asking?
Yes.
No, 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 no.
Like,
Well, what is specifically you're asking me if I see reflected in the couple's language pattern?
so, like, let's say a couple comes, and are there patterns in their language between each other that usually signify the reasons for the cheating, before they even admit to it? Like, let's say you
Oh,
see a couple that may be seeking help. Can you see, like, oh, I can kind of understand the untold language that's happening here by the different words they use or the
I see.
body language?
Predicting before that
Yes.
knowledge being
Thank
discovered.
you.
Excellent. Yeah. Uh, yes, but with lots of caveats, right? Because
Okay.
I don't want people
Okay.
to say, "Well, I see this, then well,
Right.
my partner's cheating on me." Right? Yeah, that's my
Right.
disclaimer. Just because you see
Right.
that does not mean your partner's cheating on you.
Right.
So the signs that I worry about is this person going to cheat or not, right? And also even like in a measurement of how do I know my relationship healthy
Yeah.
as Talal, right? How do I know that I'm in the safe zone and treating my partner in a respectful way, so I don't have to worry about obstacles in my life? Uh, Really, the first thing that you look at is the type of intimacy people have in the relationship. And when I say intimacy, I'm not just saying sex. So I see there's three types of intimacy. There is emotional intimacy, there is physical non-sexual intimacy, and there is physical sexual intimacy, right? So that's the trifecta. When there are signs that the intimacy is lacking and the intimacy is lacking for a long time, that's a big concern, because we all have needs for being connected. We all have the needs for us to feel intimate in our relationship, men or women. I mean, this is outside of
Yeah.
how we're socialized, that this is, guys don't need that. No, everybody needs that, or else why we're in a relationship. So when I see that intimacy is lacking, when I see that people build separate lives, right? Like, they it's almost like the only thing that tying us is co-parents, but everything else, I have my friend, you have your friend, I have my activity, your
Right.
activity, and we hardly spend time with one another. That's a red flag. Right? When I see people fight for this right of transparency and the hide behind autonomy and privacy. So here's how I conceptualize this, and it's not the
Okay.
popular view, but I'm not here to make friends. Uh, I, I, I think when you're in a healthy relationship, if you feel that there is a part of you that for your eyes only, right, and that you don't want your partner to see, that's a problem, because that either means that you're doing something that goes against what we're expecting in this relationship, or you trust your partner to be
Yeah.
vulnerable with that information. Both of these are devastating for a relationship, right? So I feel like, if I don't have anything to hide, you want to see my phone, you want to see my emails, have at it, go nuts. I'm not doing anything I'm not supposed to, but I
Right.
expect at a minimum, right? I give the analogy that we live in this big house and we have all these rooms with doors. The doors are closed. I'm not going to put a lock on them. If you want to see what's in this room, ask me, hey, Talal, can I see what's in this room? And I will open the door for you, and you can go see whatever you want. To me, that's a healthy level of navigating this transparency. So that's what I'm saying now. When you have somebody who is very protective of that transparency, like, no, you can't see my phone. My phone is always in my pocket, right? I'm getting angry, right? I have to ask a
Yeah.
question, like, what's going on? Are you talking negatively about me? Are you talking to somebody else that you're not supposed to? Uh, so these are some of the signs that I look for. In terms of language, that one, oftentimes people who have those traits, I mean, you see them, either they have a destructive pattern communication where it's always, conflicting, like nitpicking,
Yeah.
just fighting about things that they shouldn't fight about, right? Or that they're just cold and just kind of detached, right? Kind of aloof. It's not always
Hmm.
going to be people who are in their language explosive. Sometimes they can just be very detached and aloof, no no explosions. So these are the things that I look for. But again, those things can all just be also signs of other relationship problems that needs to be addressed, not always infidelity.
Yeah. We've covered a lot about the particular individuals in the relationship, about the partners. But there's a whole other aspect when I think about children that come from parents who have cheated on each other. There's like a lot of long-term guilt or anger or unprocessed emotions sometimes, and that can carry on through a lifetime. Maybe sometimes keeping
Yeah,
grandkids from grandparents on some level. Maybe you could unpack that a little bit. That's a pretty big one, right?
sure. So actually, one of the courses that I teach on my platform is children, the invisible victims of affairs, because I would
I like
say
that.
that's the most ignored facet in research as well as in clinical application, because most therapists, they're just focusing on the couple or the individual and nobody's thinking about the kids. And when I say kids, I'm not just only saying children, I'm also saying adult kids are being impacted.
Yep.
So here's how we have to wrap my mind around it. There is two different kind of negative impact when kids are being exposed to parental infidelity. There's the short term and there's the long term. Short term impact, you're going to have the kids being triangulated, right? They're going to be in the middle of this, and the kids are not all going to be siding with the same parent, right?
Yep.
So, which means that you might have also disruption in the sibling system, right? You might have, one kid who side
Yep.
with the betrayed and one kid side with the unfaithful, and now these kids are going to be fighting each other because why do you side with the bad guy, right? They're going to be triangulated. They're going oftentimes being the middle person. You tell them I said this, you tell them I said that. Oftentimes, because the parents are preoccupied with the impact of the trauma, so they drop the ball on a lot of things. So you might find the kids being parentified. They having to take care of their other siblings. They have to cook some meals, or they have to take care of, what are we going to do? Who's going to pay the bill
Right.
because mom or dad are depressed and drinking and haven't
Yep.
slept all night, right? So they end up being parentified. It might impact whatever is going on for them at that time, because I mean, yeah, as you remember, growing up in the best circumstances, not an easy process. There's a lot of confusion trying to figure out growing up on its own. Now you have to do that within the context of what goes around you.
Yep.
The long-term impact is that it affects how people view relationships, right? Because if you have your parents on a pedestal, they could do no wrong, and those people are guilty of doing something as awful, why would I have that expectation of myself, right? My parents are cheaters, then what would make me not a cheater, right? These are the people who are supposed to be better than me. They're supposed to be the adults. So it might either shape me to be somebody who doesn't have value for fidelity because, everybody does it, or it might cause me to be very rigid because I saw the devastation that it had in my family of origin. So now I'm not going to trust people, which
Yeah.
ironically could cause people to cheat on me in the future, right? Because if I
Yep.
enter a relationship protecting my heart, always thinking that people going to cheat on me, even though there is no reason for them to do so, and this is my baggage, guess what's going to happen? That relationship going to be unhappy, and then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So, and that's what I'm saying. Like when I work with my couples, before we talk about the infidelity, spend a lot of time on family of origin, and I'm always finding some factors that started there. At a minimum, is the lacking relationship maturity and not having a healthy model. But a lot of times, it's exposure to parental infidelity, and that's what really shaped their view about fidelity in their adult relationships. So it's something that we all have to be mindful of, is that when we're making those decisions, we're impacting everybody. We're not just impacting our partners. And even the ones who actually end up splitting, right? Then now they have to co-parent with the
Yeah.
filter of lack of trust. Like co-parenting is hard in the best circumstances. Now you're going to have to do it with this layer of mistrust.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a betrayal factor if indeed the parents get remarried. Like now you have this new person into the game. Like, hey, you're not my dad, you're not my mom, and like you have to compete for love from one of your parents who's now giving their affection to a stranger on some level.
Yep, and that again, that impacts, the parents' ability. Are they going to be able to have healthy relationship? What are the kids? They going to feel abandoned and betrayed by the fact
Yeah.
that this happened, and now
Yep.
we have to be paying for the consequences. Yeah, it's unfortunate. But also, like I said, sometimes there can be a silver lining, right? It is by
Sure.
showcasing that relationships are hard and you don't quit right away. And that's why I always say, let's bring up the other piece of, I always discourage people from uh, sharing and oversharing the discovery of the infidelity. So, and sometimes I get this phone calls before people actually, made that mistake. But a lot of times people already like, told so many people. And the problem that I have with this is what? Whatever decision people have to make about the future of their relationship is going to be the most important decision in their life, and that decision cannot be motivated by external influences. Because a lot of people say, well, I want to tell my family and friends because I need to vent. Well, that's what a therapist is for. That's not for your
Mm.
family and friends in this situation. Well, why is that? Why can't I vent to my friends and family? Because you going to solicit their bias, right? And everybody have their own bias, and that bias might force you to stay in a relationship that you should leave, or force you to leave a relationship that you should stay in. Not only that, but let's say that you decide to rebuild a relationship. What's going to happen to this perception that these people end up with? Whatever process that you went through as a couple to decide that we're going to rebuild on the relationship, those people are not privy to. They're just going to be stuck with, hey, this person is a cheater, this person is X, Y, and Z, and now you have to worry about repairing that, right? And then you're going to be adding more triggers for yourself and complicating your recovery journey.
Yeah, that's an aspect. I would say most people that I know that have been in that situation, that's the first person they go to is their family and friends.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So the new book that you have out, jam packed with full of incredible information. Was there something in particular in this book that was really calling to you, that you really wanted the message to get out? Like, I guess if people read this book, what message does this book send to people? What do you want people to learn when they pick up your new book and read it?
So I have two books. So I have Infidelity, the
Okay.
best worst thing that could happen to your marriage. And in this book, what readers should expect is the milestones of recovery that people need to go through in order for them to better understand the what and the why, assess the damage, and figure out what's the best way to heal. So it was designed to break down the systematic affair recovery therapy model for the average reader. Now, it's not a replacement for therapy. Think of it as,
Right.
giving you the information about how recovery works. The second book is Unfaithful and Unrepentant, Affairs Beyond the Hope of Affair. It's this one here. So this book was written for the therapists and the betrayed partners who felt that despite their best effort, repairing their relationship was the right thing to do. But despite the effort, they're still stuck. So this is not because the therapist is not doing a good job. This is not because the betrayed is not doing a good job. This is because there are a specific type of unfaithful partners makes it near impossible to heal by rebuilding the relationship. So this book did, describe the 9 archetypes on unfaithful partners
Mm,
that pretty much sabotage every aspect of the healing journey and the clients and the betrayed ability to actually navigate those milestones of recovery. So it's really more of a cautionary tale, right? Like if you're wondering,
mm.
should I rebuild? Should I not rebuild? And if you see that there's this pieces of traits that your unfaithful partners bring to the table, this is a good indication of what you're up against and why that might make healing the relationship by rebuilding as not a good idea. So it's really more of here's when infidelity, here's when repairing the relationship is not attainable. If you want to know what that looks like, that's the book for you to read.
It's interesting. Last week, I was speaking with Dr. Abby Moreno, who is an FBI profiler, and we, on some level, I can't help but hear this idea of when we were talking. She says, "George, I really have to get into the minds of some of these people to figure out their motivations and stuff like that." I would imagine the same is for you when you're writing these books. Like, how do you deal with that? It seems like it could be very intense and difficult at times.
It is, but it's very rewarding for me. And I think,
Good.
for me, seeing patterns is, I've always kind of been a broad lens kind of guy. So I really always like to do a wide zoom in human behavior. And, and really being able to, I feel like I've been fortunate enough to work with many cases of infidelity more than the average clinician or any clinician that I know. And the more people that you work with, you see the variety, but also you begin to start seeing the overarching themes, right? But also you have to
Yeah.
temper it with, at least for me, because if I make the mistake that I know everything and I'm always going to, you might pigeonhole your clients and just preconceived notions. I am always prepared to find something new or different about this infidelity case that I'm working on. And sometimes I see some of the same patterns. Sometimes a new factor is unlocked that I didn't think of, that just add more to my understanding of etiology. But also, here's that. So that's part of it from a, that's the selfish part as a professional, as
Yeah.
a growth for me. But what's useful for the client is that oftentimes the betrayed and the unfaithful, they really genuinely want to know why this happened, right? And
Right.
here's the crazy part about the infidelity. Infidelity in itself is an irrational behavior. So no matter how much time you spend on it, you will never find a logical reason why infidelity happened, right? Such reason does not exist. The best that you can find is the circumstances and the sequence of events that led to the infidelity. So part of your
Hmm.
job is to actually help the unfaithful partner unpack their thinking process. Because when the unfaithful betrayed doing this at home, the betrayed asked them, "Why did you do this?" "Well, I don't know. I was
Yeah.
selfish. I'm a bad person." Well, that's nice. That might be true, but like, give me more details, right? That doesn't give me anything, right? Because there is no pill that you can take just for selfishness. So
Yeah.
part of the autopsy for the relationship, sometimes it does feel like interrogation. And a lot of therapists are gun shy about this, right? Because we're all trained for therapeutic neutrality. I feel like when you're doing infidelity recovery, there's not no much room for it. There is a person who betrayed, and there's a person who got betrayed. You cannot sugarcoat that. Like, therapeutic neutrality in that aspect does not change it. You could do more damage in that aspect. That doesn't mean your job is to make the unfaithful feel bad and rub their nose in it. Your job is to actually not shield them from the
Yeah.
natural consequences they should experience. So I'm a-okay with orchestrating the circumstances event to make sure that to discover, does the unfaithful have the appropriate feelings or not. Because if the unfaithful understand the damage that they have caused, and they don't feel guilty or bad about it, no remorse, that's a problem, right? Why would you want to
Yeah.
rebuild with somebody who doesn't get the damage or gets the damage and they're okay with it? So part of also my job is to listen to the story and play devil's advocate and challenge what's being said to see if it's logical or illogical. Because oftentimes there are some evidence, there are texts, there's emails, there's pictures. So
Yeah.
you compare the story of the infidelity, right, with what was discovered, with all this context that you have gathered prior to tackling the story. Because remember, before I talk about the infidelity, I get your history of family of origin. I get the history of the past relationship that you're in, and the successes and failure. I get the history of your current relationship. How did we start and how we got here? Once I look at this infidelity story, you can actually see all these pieces and how much of them fit in this past history that you have created. And it goes back to being able to challenge the unfaithful of, really, what were you thinking? Because a lot of times, why wasn't thinking? No, you were thinking. It just happened too fast, and nobody asked you the questions to actually outline your reasoning behind it. But there is always a motivation. There's always a thought and feeling associated with this action, and that can be extremely useful for the couples, because now you give them the clarity. You help them understand, this is how we got here. Now, what do you want to do about it? Do you want to fix it? Is it fixable? And if you're going to fix it, guess what? We're going to have a new relationship contract that is ironclad, because now everybody know what all the factors that have influenced us to act poorly in the past, and we can be mindful of not repeating those mistakes.
Yeah. It brings up another question. When you said that in the beginning you do some research and you ask both couples, like, what is your family history like? Do you ever see, like, maybe one person is subconsciously seeking someone who will sabotage them? Like, sometimes with alcoholics or abuse, there's the enabler. Like, they'll hide the keys, they won't tell anybody, but they don't really do anything about it. Like, they've seen the signs, they know what's happening, but on some level, they're enabling them. Do you see that in infidelity too? Is maybe someone subconsciously seeking someone who will cheat on them, or are they enabling them by being quiet? Or does that make
Sure.
sense?
Sure. Some aspects of it. I don't think somebody would purposely say, you know what, I'm going to go with this person because I know they will hurt me and all of these
Right.
things, and it's going to happen, right? Because, that doesn't matter how much dysfunction a person have on an individual level. Nobody, unless you're a masochist, and that's in a pathological sense, and that you want
Right.
somebody to treat you that way, right? But I think the closest thing would be is really more along the lines of, it goes with, so part of relationship maturity, the way I describe it, it also has to
Right.
do with knowing, are you ready to be in a relationship? What kind of relationship do you think you deserve? Right. So if, I think one version of this, if that, if your family of origin and childhood experiences helped you be somebody with low self-worth and low self-esteem, you might think that this is the best you can do, right? Like,
Right.
this is, yeah, I know I want better, but this is the best I can do. They're not all bad. Yeah, they cheat on me every once in a while, but look how all the other things that they are treating me, right? That, so I can see some aspect of it in that situation. I can see sabotage in terms of, I don't think that I'm good enough for you, right? But you're not letting me off the hook, right? Maybe I can blow up my relationship that way. I've seen that happen, right? Like, I'm this
Yeah.
is the this is because this is a bell that you cannot unring. So I've seen some aspect of it manifest that way.
Uh, Hank says, do you have or do you ever recommend that some of your people attend the 12-step sex addiction groups?
So part of what I recommend for people, once we do the autopsy of the reason why it happened, if there's an individual factor that requires specialty services, I strongly recommend them to do that, whether it's substance abuse
Mm-hmm.
treatment, whether it's sex addiction treatment. But I'm always very mindful with the sex addiction, because here's the thing. I don't know if you probably already know this. Um, so the DSM-5 is the manual that
Mm.
clinicians use to diagnose mental health conditions. So in our clinician Bible, so to speak, sex addiction is not a diagnosis. So even even clinician cannot agree if sex addiction should be an actual pathological condition. Why is that? Because we're finding out that, like, the range of human sexual behavior and expression, it's wide. We cannot say this is too much or too little. So it's hard for even clinician to concretely say it's a diagnosable condition. But put that on the back burner. I have seen people struggle with that, even though it does not exist in the DSM-5. People
Yeah.
that, struggling with hypersexuality in a negative way does exist. So even if we don't want to call it addiction, right? Here's my problem. Sometimes the unfaithful and the betrayed give each other an easy way out, right? Because if you say, you know what, I can't help it, I'm an addict, maybe that will soften up the blow that, you know what, get you the help you
Right.
need. It's addiction, it's a disease. It's not too bad of a thing. Now, granted, any kind of mental health condition should have, I mean, we should take that in consideration, but I also am a firm believer, if I know I have a problem, it is my responsibility to go seek help. So me having a problem does not negate my responsibility to address it, be aware of it,
Right.
and communicate about it. So what I have seen are times where people just finding these labels to soften up the blow when it doesn't actually fit, because addiction, right, have a very specific way manifest. Sometimes it's not addiction and people just saying addiction because it makes it easier to swallow. And I feel like sometimes that distract people from doing the real work. Because what's going to happen if you're not really a sex addict? You're going to go to one of these programs, you're going to sit there, you're going to just check a box, right? And fast forward, and you're going to say, you know what? These people are not like me. Well, they're not like you
Yep.
because you're not an addict, right? And then the treatment fizzle out, and we're treating something that's not the real reason, but we thought it was a real reason because it makes everybody feels better about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're treating the symptom instead of the actual disease or the actual root cause
Well,
of why you're doing what you're doing.
yeah, or sometimes you're actually putting the wrong label, that this is not really your dysfunction.
Mm.
Just because you had a sexual affair, that does not make you a sex addict, right? And
Yeah.
and when people say also, like, what's when you're a when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail too, right? So also how we're doing our assessment too, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, even therapy is a business, right? And not all
Yeah.
businesses are going to be focused on doing the right thing versus the wrong thing. So I'm an advocate for doing specialty services, as long as people are actually doing a thorough assessment and this is something that they need, right? Versus that this is just something they hang on to just to make the story somewhat palatable and convince their partner to let them off the hook.
What do you think about, like, in a perfect world? I know there's no such thing, but Would it be possible, and if it was possible, might it make a difference to have relationship maturity as a class for kids maybe in middle school or something like that?
If I was king of the world, that would be the first thing that I would do. Because it blows my mind, right?
Yeah.
That something as important as relationship, one of the most impactful thing in our life, one of the causes of a lot of our distress, something that we don't put any formal training or I
Yeah.
mean, it's amazing because I think a lot of these issues would have been prevented. And I think, when I think about like, well, why does this happen? Because maybe we think that we have an actual outlet for that through spirituality, right? Faith and all of these things. And I think that helps in a little bit, but it doesn't really give you that concrete thing. And also, not everybody's going to be able to have access to that or the right access to that. But what I envision, like
Yeah.
even if the fund is there to do that, I would imagine there would be some kind of debate about do you teach sex education or not, so that
Right.
we will be running in that potential wall.
Yeah, I think that it would go a long way if people just change sex education to relationship education. Because you're right, not a whole lot of people have the stability or have a mentor or have a support group that can say, look, this might be happening in your life. Here's some things that you can apply to your life to make sure they don't happen again. Here's a way you might be feeling. Here's a way you could feel about it. Like providing those options for someone who is beginning to mature as an adult and getting to see relationships with a new lens can be life changing. It can be that which they need to break that cycle on some level, I think.
Well, sure, because think about like where you learn about your
Yeah.
relationship, right? You said your home, your family and friends, what you see on TV, what you hear in songs
Yep.
about relationship, and I can tell
Yeah.
you the majority of these outlets, they're not the solid outlets to how healthy relationship is supposed to work. Just think about any love song. The majority of love
Yep.
songs, they're bad relationship lessons.
Yeah, that's a great point to think about. And then we're back. When I think about culture, I always think of the first four letters that make up culture. It's a cult on some level, and it's just
Yeah.
bombarding you with these horrible ideas of like, depending on which, not all music, but a lot of music is just about heartache. And I can understand it's a place where you can create, but when you're playing that all the time and you're surrounded by it, it's sort of paving a path for you, path to destruction on some level.
Well, sure. It
But
shapes how you see it shapes how you see the
yeah,
world and your place in it, and that's really huge.
what are some, if you could leave us with a few nuggets of advice or encouragement for people that maybe are finding themselves inadequate in a relationship or beginning to have questions about a relationship. Like maybe you could just leave us with some some really upbeat ideas about relationships, the purpose of them, and how you find your way to be uplifted when you talk about all of this.
Perfect. So I'll leave you and the folks listening with the tool. I
Nice.
want I really encourage people to, or encourage my clients to have a business meeting for the relationship, because remember we said healthy relationship should operate like a business partnership. And if you are in a successful enterprise, what are you going to have? You're going to have meetings. What is the purpose of those meetings? Well, those meetings are your therapy session without the therapist present. Once a week, carve out a time for yourself to actually figure out where we at. The purpose of that meeting is really to say, here's what's working. Thank you so much for doing this. I like that. Keep doing more of this. And here's the things that I have concern about. Can we talk
Hmm.
about what happened? Can we talk how this impacted me? Can we talk about resolutions? Because I really think if people get in the habit of on a regular basis, they're evaluating where they are, they're going to be really quick at identifying deficit and fixing them before they go south. More importantly, if consistently you're telling your partners the things that you appreciate and like, and they're authentic and genuine and not lip service, wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't you want to go back to that company, right? Where everybody says, hey, you
Yeah.
know what? Once a week, thank you so much for doing all of this. I'm impressed with that, right? So I cannot emphasize that value of that. Now, business meeting is not a date night. That's separate. Date night is fun, right? This is we're talking about, this logistic. And also, I think it's important for couples to have a metric of what they expect from their partner. Like in regular life, you have a job description, right? You know if you're doing
Yeah.
a good job as a boyfriend, husband, and wife, right? So you need the same thing. And how do you do that? By taking the time to tell your partner, here's the needs that I expect you to meet. And do I agree on meeting those needs? And are those needs healthy and realistic and compatible? Because really, like one of the main reason, if you ask me, why do people come to couples counseling in general, not infidelity, that people are unhappy because they have expectations not being met. Simple
Yep.
as that, right? And there's a reason why those expectations are not being met. Sometimes it's just the fact that people never talked about them. Sometimes people don't even know what those needs are, right? Because if I, as an individual, don't know what would makes me happy in the relationship, I could be with the best partner ever, but like they don't know what I don't know, right? So I think being able to get in that habit of not being on autopilot and consistently evaluating where you're at and how you're growing and changing is going to be the best safeguard that you would have against infidelity, and it's going to be the best way for you to make sure that you're happy and fulfilled and your partner is happy and fulfilled. So that's really what I encourage. My wish for the world is for people to actually go in that direction of not being on autopilot and their individual growth and their growth as a couple.
That's great advice, and it's a great tool. And I'm thankful for your time today. I feel like we got to cover a lot of really interesting topics and areas that may not normally get a lot of light shed on them. And for anybody within the sound of my voice, if you're listening to this live or if you're hearing the podcast for the first time tomorrow, a year from now, or 2 years from now, go down to the show notes, click on the links, and check out Dr. Talal's books. They're packed with really good information that's practical and it can help you. And I would also encourage you to reach out to him if you're curious about anything that we had on this show. And that'll all be down in the show notes out there. And Dr. Talal, hang on briefly afterwards. But to everybody who spent time with us today, I want to say thank you for your time. And I hope you enjoy your day. And that's all we got. Ladies and gentlemen, aloha.